as you know, we use a software program called Street Saver to chunk through a lot of analysis. And every year we have to upload data to Street Saver based upon the work we did last year, as well as additional data elements that we can gather and upload. So with that in mind, we put together an overview of the schedule on how we think we can best progress through all the data and analysis, the determination of the criteria that you'll be giving us guidance on. So we want to make sure that by October, November, we're having the most formal or serious discussion on the criteria that you want us to use for developing the fiscal year 21 road list. And then in December, we would take whatever came from the subcommittee to the full TAC for their review and confirmation and approval. Also in December, we'll then have our data prep done on the road data set. And so some of those things that we're going to be working on, as I mentioned, we'll be uploading the work that we've done this year. So that will be now in the Street Saver. We're also, we started, actually in the spring, we started a process of looking for a way to get better pavement condition information. And so we've been working with different companies, consulting companies, and getting estimates for getting a pavement condition index for our whole network, which will be an update of the PASER data we've been using.
Could be van-based?
Yes. Also, we will be receiving the data from the LiDAR run that was done as part of a sign replacement project. And that will also give us more specific information about the actual area of our management sections. We have a general understanding of the width, but there's bump outs and cul-de-sacs and whatnot, so we'll have that better information to look at. So all of that stuff, we're going to be working on our side of the house to get that network.
Yolanda Weinberg is present.
Where was I? Oh yeah, so we're going to be getting that GIS representation of the network more accurate and then uploading it into Street Saver. Once we have that done, then we'll be able to start running scenarios. We project to be able to do that in February. And then in March, April, we'll be able to actually start preparing road lists and bid packages. And with the goal of getting the bid packages to procurement in May so that we are definitely ready to hit the ground on July 1. So that's our overall suggested schedule. So comments or questions?
Sure. What consultants are you using to help with this? Is it somebody locally or somebody from out of town?
Well, there's about 4 or 5 major players in the realm of getting this PCI information. Fugro is one of them. IMS is one of them, and it turns out that IMS happens to be a company from Tempe, so about as close local as we can get. We're intrigued by their proposal because they say that they have been working closely with Street Saver and have data to help refine pavement deterioration curves, which is going to be a subject a few items later on the agenda. And so that would be very helpful to us. And then there's a couple other national-based companies, but right now, the information we've gotten from IMS and Tempe seems both to fit our needs and to be a reasonable price. So that's a nice combination.
Yeah.
We have to go through the procurement process. They have done work for other counties, so we may be able to piggyback on the other counties' procurement process. We're investigating those things right now.
Our director asked for procurement yesterday to investigate other jurisdictions to use.
That joint procurement process. Sounds good. Okay, anybody have any comments?
So just if I can, Mr. Chair, if there's any guidance from the committee, would you like to have us present this to the full TAC committee? Do you see any adjustments that you'd like to have made to it? Does it look okay? Or are we moving it in the right direction?
Well, it seems to me like the schedule, everything's on a critical path, pretty much. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. So how critical is it to the repair program if something slips and you don't get the contracts out until after the beginning of the next fiscal year, if something happens in this process?
You mean actually the repair contracts?
Yeah. Because you're talking July 1st to try to start releasing contracts.
Right.
Yeah.
We will have larger packages this year. I mean, in FY '21, there'll be larger packages.
Yeah.
Can we still get them done? I'd actually defer to Rob on that.
So part of what we're doing right now is, we're going to be advertising for another, job order contract. That was approved by the board for $2 million per contractor, or roughly, we're considering it about $10 million. So, once that is in place, we plan to use that this year. We just have to go through the process to get the people on the qualified list. And then once we have that on board, we'll be able to start everything July 1st next year. So that's one of several ways that we can procure work.
Yeah, and you've obviously had enough recent experience with getting the maintenance contractors out there.
That and we'll also have a master agreement for doing any kind of seal work, so crack seal, fog seal, chip seals, microsurfacing, those kinds of items. We're also in the process right now of getting that out for work this year.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so the increase in funding for road repair that Rich alluded to, we're looking, based on the county administrator's recommendation to the board on the PAYGO program, to increase funding from the general fund in increments of $5 million a year. So for 20, there's $5 million. For 21, it's 10, and it continues to grow to $25 million. And then on the department side, they have identified funding in those subsequent years that will reach $25 million. So soon we'll be looking at delivering a $50 million program in a single fiscal year. And what we are interested in doing is setting a schedule for this interaction with the subcommittee, with the full transportation advisory committee, that enables us to have consistency from year to year, so that the committee members know what to expect, staff knows what our time targets are, the public understands what that is. So we would look to this to be the cycle for selecting of roads on an annual basis, with an ever-increasing dollar amount that we'll need to deliver in a single fiscal year. And that becomes important because as the program grows and there's more roads to deliver, if we can't fulfill the entire set of repairs in a fiscal year, we're going to be then carrying that over and only making it more difficult for us to deliver the subsequent year's package.
Yeah. Because you'll have the leftover work plus that additional incremental revenue.
That's correct.
And a finite number of contractors, unless we're growing contractors here also.
Well, and just to that point, Mr. Chair, we've been meeting with the Arizona Transportation Builders Association. So that's a group of contractors that do construction, road construction, and paving repair work. And they have been extremely helpful in identifying things that they see that they feel could help speed up the process of getting contracts awarded, that could potentially keep the pricing competitive, that could give us multiple tools. What Rob just mentioned, the $2 million jock limit for road repair, that was a recommendation given. So we have a number of treatments that are temperature dependent, and what we would be able to do with a selection of roads along with this schedule is we could tell them prior to the start of the fiscal year, we need this certain set of work done anytime during the fiscal year. You tell us when you're available to do it, because what they've said is that with the work that's being done by ADOT, the City of Tucson, Pima County, and on those treatments that are temperature dependent, we're hitting them all at the same time. So this gives them the opportunity to spread the work out and get it done within the fiscal year and use times that otherwise they're not scheduled.
Yeah.
So, and that's, you know, been beneficial. The city of Tucson's been participating in those meetings jointly with us, so we're discussing things with them, like pavement mix, so that we can not require the plants to retool each run. So we're having that conversation, and then looking at, you know, a number of other strategies that could assist us from a regional perspective. I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and that's greater longevity of our roads at the most cost-effective pricing.
Yeah. It's interjurisdictional and bringing the contractors in, and that's great public policy, so hats off to that.
And PAG has been participating. PAG attended the last meeting on pavement design discussion, so I think that's only gonna benefit us
Sure.
for the region.
Yeah, that's good. You know, I think if you do present, and, you know, we appreciate you can talk about it at the next meeting, I think it would be good to start with a big overview. We're just talking about how about all the jurisdictions are working together, and then window it down into what you're doing here locally. Because, you know, I think that regional perspective is probably even more important than this. This is obviously important to the county. That's terrific. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up something. We would like in Green Valley to have a little more input into the selection of roads. We're not incorporated, but we have the Green Valley Council, which has a contract with the county. And we take service requests and we take input and then send it directly to the county. And we have a road prioritization committee that rides every road in Green Valley. And what I'd like for us to consider is we're almost like a city, is let us work with Rob and his staff and make suggestions, because the ones that were selected this year, quite frankly, there's other roads that we felt higher priorities. So we'd like to sit down with the county staff and have our input into this process.
Well, it sounds like you have a different set of criteria, or at least not totally the same set. If you're coming up with a different list than what the county.
Well, we use the phaser.
Yeah.
And then we go out and ride, and of course, the phaser right now, if you have a failed road, it doesn't tell you what degree it's failed.
Right.
So we actually go out with qualified people and look at what failed condition is for the road.
Yeah.
So we just like to have input in the future.
Sure.
And we understand the county's the final decision, but it gives us a local input, and politics come into this.
Oh, sure.
Well, the larger issue in what you're talking about is how when we first gathered together for the first time and looked at road prioritization, was having the final discretion being up with the supervisor who was in that district based on the feedback that they got from the community. And so we too had extensive community meetings, and it was important for us in our district to get input from the community. We have the Southeast Regional Council, which is modeled heavily, totally, on the Green Valley Council. So yeah, I think there does need to be some allowance of discretion for community outreach and getting feedback from the community. Not every district did that last year. I understand that also presents problems with efficiency, because there may be, from the county perspective, efficiencies of doing it a certain way, cost savings in doing it a certain way, but it's just really tough, especially with as aware as the communities are of the roads issue, how so many people have gathered together in small and large groups and reached out to supervisors, and some have been present at the TAC meetings. That I think that feedback needs to be considered in allowing the supervisor to make the ultimate approval of the list.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, and obviously the committee, right, the subcommittee and the full committee will decide on the criteria that they'd like us to follow. And just a couple of points. So we transitioned, right, between the local road repair program and the fiscal year 20 program to a new set of tools. And with that, we had conversation with the committee. Staff came in, gave some recommendations on criteria. There was good discussion around that, and there was some adjusting of that to land on a final criteria. And then within there, there was the allowance for staff to make some adjustments to group road repairs in a logical way, so that we weren't doing a road in a subdivision or a few roads in a subdivision and not touching the other ones, or that on the arterial and collector roadway system that we weren't making breaks in the segment of corridors that were illogical. So we're going to talk a little bit today, and staff's going to give you some information. At the last TAC committee meeting, the full TAC committee meeting, there was some suggestion from one of the call to the audience speakers that certain subdivisions and roads within those subdivisions that were selected were candidates for a treatment other than the 2-inch mill and fill, which we had identified. And with that, staff has gone back, taken a look at not only those subdivisions that were suggested as maybe being candidates for alternative treatment, but is looking at the entire list of selected roads. And one of the things you'll hear in a little bit is that the degraded Paiser rating. So remember, we have not done new Paiser ratings in most instances since 2012, I think, is the most
For a lot of them.
for a lot of them. So what we did then was we built a model to go ahead and degrade Paiser based on some criteria. Now, in reality, certain roads may deteriorate less than others during that time period. So what Rich had talked about is a crucial element, we believe, going into the next cycle of road selection is getting current pavement condition index, right? That's the PCI. So we're transitioning from Paiser to PCI, and we need to get current data on the condition of all the roads in the network so that we can use that in making the selection. So what you'll hear from staff is that where we used the degraded Paiser and we selected what were calculated to be failed roads, some of those are not necessarily as failed as we thought they may be. So I think to that point, by Mr. Weaver, we acknowledge. I think the input process is important. I mean, obviously, it's important, and from a staff perspective, we just ask that if there is an element of public input, that it be incorporated within a schedule, within a window that enables us to be able to select roads and begin procuring those roads to ensure that we can get the work completed in the fiscal year. So we're going to follow your direction. We may have some thoughts and some suggestions. I'm sure there'll be much discussion, and hopefully we'll arrive at a set schedule that we can use, you know, this coming for fiscal year 21 and then for subsequent years. And I think this is a bit of an iterative process, right? We're learning along the way, and I think we're going to get better and better collectively as we engage in these discussions and we see the results of the roads selected and then delivering the work on those roads. So, you know, I think that it's important to find, right, those shortcomings in the methodology, to address it in a way that hopefully, right, what I would like to see, and I've spoken to Mr. Weaver about this and others, what I would like to see is that in the end, that the adopted criteria from the committee will generate a list of roads that everybody can say those are the right roads, right? What I'm less comfortable with is if we adopt a criteria, we generate the list of roads from that criteria, and then we put that away, and then we replace it with another list. And I think from just a public confidence standpoint, and I understand there may be questions going, hey, we said do failed roads, you didn't pick all the failed roads. We have answers as to why that happened, and it wasn't intentional, and we'll refine the system to make sure we get there. So that's just the ask that we have, is that we work collectively to come up with a criteria that in the end is reflective of what the community segments would say are the right candidate roads to be fixed. And if then what we're dealing with is there's more of those candidate roads to be fixed than there's money, that's a different conversation than, hey, you didn't apply the money you had to the right roads. And we just appreciate the opportunity to interact with the subcommittee, with the full committee, with the individual members in getting to the best arrangement that is going to put us where we wanna be in getting roads fixed.
That's why I'm bringing it up early, because this year, it's our fault. We didn't get our input in early enough, and I don't wanna screw up the process. But I wanna do it early so we can get our input, and I'm all for PCI. I realized that when we were doing the phaser, you didn't have one vehicle, and you didn't ride the roads probably, once every 9 or 10 years. So this will be a much better system, and I think it'll give us a better option of what roads need to be done.
Yeah, good, okay.
Yeah.
Tom Chairman, this conversation, both sides of it, makes me now feel like this schedule needs a little bit more room, I guess, for that public input and for whatever kind of modifications might be needed there at the end, say that March, April. I'm just curious whether we really need until October, November for the criteria review. We're talking about what criteria to use. We've had those conversations in previous years. Wouldn't think we're 4 months away from being able to ask the TAC to ratify that. And if we did that, it would pull the schedule up a little bit and allow a little more room there at the end where you're preparing these road lists and talking about them at TAC and eventually sending to the board. And that just concerns me a little. I don't know how the rest goes.
That kind of gets back to what I was talking about before, about the schedule and making sure it's gonna work for everybody.
Right.
So, it seems to me, Lucretia, that the TAC could begin to start seeing some of the criteria at the meeting in September.
Yeah, the problem is that we cannot implement the criteria until we have the updated PCI for the roadways.
Yeah.
So the criteria is fine, it's not on the critical path, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
is that we could do it at any time.
Yeah.
But until we have the PCI ratings of the roads, we can't generate a road list.
Yeah, well, that's
And
okay. Yeah, that's okay. I think what Mr. Weaver's talking about too, you would benefit from knowing what the criteria.
I benefit from knowing the criteria and also which roads, so we can have interface.
Yeah.
What we do is inform our community what's coming up, and it's a benefit to the county.
Yeah.
And if we have an input into it, we could support it a lot better.
Right, well, I think, like Carmine was said, the first step is gonna be getting the criteria
Right.
fleshed out, and then they're gonna run the software and see what numbers come out of that,
Right.
so. To me, it makes sense to first, to see have the whole committee see the criteria. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I think that, one of the things we need to figure out with that is how we incorporate that public input.
Mhm.
You know, like what is the quality of input? Is it gonna be from community meetings? And then how much that plays into it. I don't know if there's a formula for that, like 20% of public input or what, but, I mean, we have to figure out how, or what that input is going to look like and how we would incorporate that is my concern, that we don't, if we're just gonna listen to people say, no, my road is the worst,
Mhm.
that's really not good quality
Yeah,
input.
yeah, exactly.
I know the way that it happened last time is that an invitation went out to all the supervisors to encourage them if they felt it was appropriate to have community input. Frankly, there were some, I think maybe even most, I think it was just District 1 and 4 that actually had community meetings. And so I think it just depends on the supervisor to set the tone. So then in our community, we went out and we had the support of the county. They were encouraging, yes, critical, and being able to be there to answer people's questions. It really turned out to be more of an education piece rather than I want this road, I want that road. I mean, generally the community was very excited when anything was being done, and it was just a matter of kind of explaining this is what's here on this first round. And I think in general it went pretty well. The tweaks that we made I thought were relatively small. It wasn't like a whole new list that came out or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that Supervisor Miller is well aware of how to hold those meetings. I went to one of them with her, and I don't know whether anybody else from any of the other districts would even wind up having them beyond our 2 districts. I don't know.
So, Mr. Sheriff, if I may, sorry, John. There's opportunity for overlap, right, with the scheduled tasks that are identified here. So I think that this is a discussion that this subcommittee can continue. It can take place in front of the entire TAC in terms of how to incorporate public involvement. I would suggest that we begin whatever process is decided upon soon or early in this schedule, so it can, proceed or overlap somewhat the steps that are shown up there. That can begin in September, October, August, September.
Where is the appropriate time to insert the, because I'm thinking if it happens all the way toward the end, then that's gonna be more of what you said you didn't want, which is you guys going through all the work to present the roads and then saying, okay, we're gonna come up with a different set. So
So
what is
it would be helpful to get public input as we are discussing finalizing the criteria, right? The public may note things that we identify as a pattern that we could create some quantifiable criteria to incorporate into the selection model. So I think that would be a good use of time if the committee is going to solicit input from residents, doing that early in the process so that we can analyze it and say, these are the themes or these are the areas, and we believe that this criteria, a set of criteria, helps to address that or meet that.
So that as the current schedule exists, then that feedback perhaps should take place September, October,
Right.
as opposed to pushing it down to
Is-
March,
is-
April,
yeah,
right?
what-
Is that
what-
my understanding?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay.
Is there a mechanism to do some of this electronically by a website? Of, having this process spelled out, and all, people can post their comments and see what's going on. I mean, the expectation of us going out to, Green Valley or whatever, and everybody who's interested being able to tune in is, that's not realistic. But if we have an option of some kind of method via the internet.
We've already got a meeting scheduled in September that we're gonna invite all of our community to come, talk about what was done this year, and hopefully we'd have some criteria, say, here's how it's gonna be done next year.
Well, my point is to have this information, it's kind of out there. When people want to look for it, it's there, they can find out what what the committee is up to, what the county is doing, and so, I mean, obviously, this is really important. As I've said many times before, congestion is no longer an issue in this community. Our problem is road repair. And so the more exposure we have here, I think the better. Yeah.
I wanted to get a little more specific about the scope of our criteria, I guess. Am I mistaken that for arterial collectors, we're really doing that internally with the staff based on some pretty objective criteria? So are we just strictly talking about local roads, are we not?
So we applied the same criteria to both locals and the arterials and collectors.
No, not quite. So our arterial network is a huge investment, and
Right.
from a risk perspective, we're holding it to a higher standard. So the roadways in which we're investing, we're not gonna do the worst first type of treatments, right? We're gonna continue maintaining those. And so for that, yes, we're using Street Saver, and we have a better handle on the PCI condition of those roadways than we do the local ones, so we have greater confidence that, and even though the new PCI system will update all the roadways, but on the arterial and major collector network, yes, we are going to be managing those internally based on the monies that are.
So the criteria we're talking about primarily, at least, is applied to local.
Yes.
All right, related to that, so we've got, the $5 million that we're gonna spend this year on this regional priority and recreation gateway. Again, do we have anything to say about this list? Because you're talking about crossing jurisdictional boundaries. I'm looking at the list and it's got really major collectors, minor arterials. I don't know what other is, but these all look like fairly significant roadways to me. So again, I assume that list is not something we're involving ourselves with either, is that correct?
So that list is a subset of the arterials and
Right,
collectors.
right.
So, yeah, it's part
Now,
of that.
just related to that, by the way, some of these I do think cross the jurisdictional boundaries, do they not?
They do.
Did the jurisdictions have any say about us doing that work inside them?
Yeah, we don't actually cross the jurisdictional boundary, our work stops at.
Oh, we do? Why did I think we were gonna go into the cities because it's general fund money?
No, in this case, it's stopping
So the rationale was that they serve as linkages between the jurisdictions, and as such, then it was appropriate for use of general funds to those regional corridors.
Oh, I thought the equity argument was that we should spend some of the general fund money inside the jurisdictions.
No, the equity is that they're gaining the benefit of driving on the unincorporated.
I like that.
So the previous concern is that property tax, primary property tax is, it's paid by residents throughout the region in all jurisdictions, and that taking those revenues and only applying them to repair roads in the unincorporated area created an inequity. So what was asked by the county administrator was for Department of Transportation staff to identify these regional corridors and these recreational corridors which are used by residents from multiple jurisdictions. So they either go in and out of jurisdictions, they serve as critical linkages between jurisdictions, or they provide access to places of visitation, not only by our local residents, but from out-of-town residents who partake in those properties.
So again, just to stay with that. So Carmine, when you earlier said we're starting with $5 million this year in hopes of increasing by $5 million increments. So ultimately, $25 million worth of roadways are this category of regional priority, right? Isn't that what we're talking about?
That's correct.
And so our task is gonna be with the remainder, or perhaps the remainder that's funded for local roads. Because again, we're not involving ourselves all that much with arterial collector roads. I'm just trying to get an idea how big our task is, or what our scope is when it comes to identifying criteria that applies.
Yeah, right. What were the criteria we used before? We used pavement condition, or some proxy for it, traffic volumes, did we use density, something like that?
For the local road repair program?
Uh-huh.
Yes, we used the formula of the ADT over the length,
Yeah.
or length of the ADT. So a ratio that way that gave us balance.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, getting back to John's point about the local jurisdictions, other than the city of Tucson, I don't know that any of the local jurisdictions really have a road maintenance problem. Laurel Valley, Marana, Sahuarita, I think their roads are in pretty good shape.
They are, Sahuarita's an
Yeah.
excellent
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
I mean, the smaller communities have done an excellent job of maintaining what ostensibly are newer streets. And a lot of them are newer subdivisions compared to the city and unincorporated area. Okay. Anything else on this issue? So I think we resolved that at the next full meeting, we're gonna do basically a presentation.
Well, one of the things I was gonna ask, was that probably John or somebody, present the findings of this group, and that could be incorporated as part of that.
Yeah, I'm not going to be there. That's-
Oh, you're not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna be I'll be on the Olympic Peninsula.
Far, far away.
So just a point of clarification, so what I did here is to add a row above the tax subcommittee criteria review for public input or public comment in the September-October range.
I think public and local input.
Although it's merged together because it's part of the criteria discussion of the tax. I don't know if it's a line item before just for public. We need to have someone to take to the public.
Well, yeah, right.
Right.
So how would you like me to characterize that?
Well, I guess maybe leave it open for the full task to discuss, because we'll have just say that we need to work, we're aware that we need to work some public participation into this, and I'd like you not to forget my comment earlier about trying to do something through the internet as well, and just having some transparent stuff out there that people can.
Well, I think it is important to have something on the calendar though, that
Yeah.
addresses it, so we can put a line item then, and that's.
Well, yeah, right, you can put it in a tentative date or something.
Yeah,
on it, so it doesn't
September,
look
October,
tentative.
community
Right.
input.
This, yeah, because the technical and procurement stuff you have, I think that's pretty definitive. You pretty well can put a date on that, but the public involvement, the political aspects of it are a little bit different.
There's multiple times when you're getting public input during this. Why don't you maybe just put a star on the individual topics that are gonna have public input as part of them, and then just a footnote at the bottom.
Yeah, the asterisk is
Yeah.
public input.
Just
So,
a quick
Mr.
note.
Chair,
Oh,
no, sorry.
Yeah.
If I may, and to the suggestion, obviously there's gonna be public input throughout the way. Gathering as much as possible to incorporate into the criteria will give us the ability to generate roads that then do not require a lot of adjustment. So, right, that I think is important to establish, is that we're trying to allow for public input and to take that information and convert it into criteria that then produces a list of roads that the committee as a whole and that the general public at least recognizes went through a formalized process that did not then get discarded and replaced with other selected roadways. I think we have to be mindful of that and do things in a transparent fashion so that there is confidence that everybody is on equal standing, understanding that some people in any given year may fall outside the criteria. And that's a function of we don't have the resources to do everything at once, but that there is some relative confidence and assurance that if you were eligible under the criteria, you received equal consideration, and the limitation was more so, we ran out of dollars, not that we picked, one road arbitrarily over another road. So I think that we can footnote the entire table that says public participation will be welcomed throughout the process, and then maybe try to insert an item that is geared more towards gathering public input that will inform the creation and approval of criteria, right? So incorporating both aspects.
And then maybe changing the first row to start in August or September?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think are we having meetings every month? Do we have a summer vacation at all or not?
No.
Just you, Chris.
Just me. You're welcome to join me.
And staff had a comment.
Just
Yeah.
a quick reminder
Yeah.
from the Regional Road Repair Program, we set up the webpage for the advisory committee, so there is a link. So what we did the last year is we solicited feedback from residents, and so they submitted their road requests. We have the report from the previous time, but we could also do that again.
Sure.
The website is still active, so you can still receive requests, and we can provide them to the committee as often as we need. So that's still active.
What I was hoping we'd be able to do is discourage people from asking to do their road
Yes,
first,
that's exactly what I
and
was
somehow to
gonna say.
make them more significant and community-wide comments.
Or
about
maybe
process.
criteria
Yeah.
comments,
Uh-huh.
like what should we be looking at as
Right.
opposed to, I want my road fixed, like what are some of what's the criteria we should
Sure.
be looking at?
Establishing that PCI would be so helpful
Yeah.
in that, then everybody can understand, where their road falls on the failed road criteria.
A lot of the comments we heard when people were saying, do my road first, was safety related. I don't know if there's a way to work safety in there. I mean, that's such a general term to begin with, how you put it in as a criteria. but-
What criteria do you want?
Yeah,
for
exactly.
safety?
Right, I mean, people are talking about tripping, and they could get their wheelchair through. I
Are
don't
the
know how
roads,
you-
are the roads where people were talking about tripping and was like a walking hazard, were those all failed roads?
No.
No.
Hmm.
So a failed road, it's a road that somebody can't walk in that has a lot of potholes in it doesn't necessarily qualify as a failed road
Well,
by
some,
using the
some,
system.
some of their issues were not necessarily potholes, rough surface or
Mhm.
loose gravel, different items like that
Okay.
on the road, as opposed to
Yeah.
potholes.
Mhm.
Obviously a bumpy, rough, patched, multiple patch road. You're pretty much looking at a failed road, but not necessarily.
Most of our people who complain about getting injured in Green Valley, it's not the roadway itself, where they fall on the edge of the road and deteriorated, the road might be fine. So it's not necessarily a failed road, it's just conditions along the edge and things.
Okay.
So there's no edge of road criteria? Edge of
Michael,
road
that's
conditions?
Well, is it curved or is it uncurved? You know, generally, when we've done uncurved roadways, over time, we've incorporated what's called a safety edge, which actually gives you, instead of a blunt edge, it actually tapers. And so we try to keep that shouldered up, but that helps with traffic, but it also helps with people not just falling off the edge of the pavement or it crumbling. It tends to, because it's compacted, it tends to hold the shape and not flake off or gravel out as much.
I guess part of the discussion when we're looking at criteria is how is the road used, and if it's used exclusively for vehicular travel, that's one thing, but if it's also used for pedestrians, if there's no sidewalks or walkways or something, some way we can work that criteria in as well.
But if we're talking about neighborhood roads, then there's gonna be use for both.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of them do have sidewalks or a reasonable shoulder, but for the roads that don't have any real accommodation for pedestrians, maybe we can somehow weight those a little bit differently. It's, obviously, I don't have an answer to that right now, but it's something to think about, some head scratching on that one. But obviously, we heard a lot of complaints from, basically on the side of pedestrian activity, and not so much potholes and damage to cars and things like that, so. Okay. Well, I think we kind of talked about item number 4 already, haven't we? Got that? Okay. Anybody else have anything on that?
No, it was basically just this discussion of, we utilize specific criteria with the regional local road repair program. We had discussions at that time about criteria. How do you incorporate safety? People wanted to incorporate crash data. There's not a lot of crash data on local roads. So that's why that was kind of, how do you put that into the system? I think with this, you're looking at, when you're talking about pedestrians, when you're looking at other aspects of safety, it will be easier. We have a lot of data. We're going to have a lot of data on our roads, not just the road condition, but all the infrastructure around our road.
Right.
That we've had the roads scanned. So,
Or you basically will have a cross-section, in
Yes.
addition to just the pavement conditions.
yes. More information is always better to help you make informed decisions, but establishing that criteria, we could come up with criteria, but if it doesn't mean anything to the people in the neighborhood, it's only our information.
Well, I think there should definitely be something that addresses that curb treatment you were talking about, those roads that have the do or don't have. What is that called, you said?
It's called a safety edge,
Safety edge.
but it's basically for uncurved roadways.
Like a header?
When
Is it concrete header?
No, it's actual pavement. What it is, it's a shoe
Oh.
that condenses.
Okay, thick edge,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's similar to a thin edge.
Right, that protects the edge of the pavement also,
Yeah.
obviously.
Because I think all the people who have been talking about the walking condition, when they use their walkers or wheelchairs or strollers, that would be a way of addressing that.
Well, yes, and there's that, and in some of the areas in Green Valley where they've had trip and falls is in the dirt shoulder area where there's actually drainage, so it's eroded out, and then there've been issues with that. So that's even harder to incorporate into pavement maintenance, a pavement preservation system.
I tell you though, I give kudos to our maintenance staff. They do an excellent job for us in Green Valley. We report a pothole or an edge, within 2 weeks they're there to fix it, and they do a fantastic job. We appreciate it.
You are loved.
Well, we have a meeting every month with the maintenance people, supervisors
For
that do
that
the work.
area, yeah.
And we get input from the citizens on service requests, and then we send it to the right department and we follow it.
Sure.
And see how it's going, so it helps.
Yeah.
We actually don't have
Yeah.
we don't have maintenance supervisors anymore.
Oh, you don't?
No,
They're the new.
we're organized differently.
Yeah, okay.
I have a quick
If
question
I may,
for
oh,
Rob.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
If I may on that point, so the department has established service delivery timeframes for the entire county. So the timeframes that are being adhered to in Green Valley are in place for the entire county. And those are posted on the county website, so it's not a function solely of the interaction that we have with the Green Valley community. Admittedly, they are super organized,
Yeah.
they work very closely with us, we appreciate that relationship, but it's not to say that other areas where that structure doesn't exist is getting any longer time frame, repairs, in the system.
Good
So
job
the-
of saying that.
The
Carmen.
network and the department has set standards for the type of treatment on the particular classification of road, and here's the target for those repairs to occur. And we can come back to the committee at any given point in time, which you'd be interested in seeing, and give a summary overview of that information, what the targets are, how we've done over a 6-month or 12-month period in meeting those timeframes, things of that nature.
That would be interesting.
I'd also like to bring up, as part of the topic that came up regarding pedestrians and shoulders and eroded shoulders, et cetera, is we've been focusing on pavement, but if the public input demonstrates that there's a lot of need on shoulders, the committee could consider peeling away a small portion of the allocation, a few $100,000 for cement-treated shoulders, because that's an issue we've had. There's so much erosion that we can't keep up with the treatment of shoulders, and so we could, some of that could potentially be contracted out. We could cement, treat the shoulders to stabilize them a little more, recompact them, and then they would last longer if they were pedestrian issues.
So does the safety edge address the shoulders or just the edge, and then you still would have dirt, so that's.
It's just the edge.
So the safety edge purpose is that if the shoulder erodes, then you have a slope that is a little bit
Yeah, it's
more
not like a blunt
traversable
edge.
than just a
Yeah, got it.
drop off.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea, and maybe this is for Rob, of when we're gonna have that PCI information compiled?
The sneaky grin lets me know.
Oh,
I'll field that question.
field.
I don't recall if you heard the discussion about, we've been starting to look at the PCI back in the spring. So were you here for the discussion about the procurement of it?
I came in the middle of your procurement discussion.
Okay.
That's why I
Yeah,
think I missed that. Sorry.
so we have reached out to several companies and got scopes of work and understanding of schedule. We're just now starting the procurement process. So our understanding right now is, best case scenario is we can have PCI in 5 months.
Okay.
From when we get them on board. So if we get them on board in October, we have PCI by December, and that's when we then have our data preparation complete. Because we'll merge that with all the other data that we've been adding to the Street Saver data set, and then we'll be able to start running our scenarios.
So we won't have any PCI data in time for our community meetings.
Correct. So any scenarios that you want us to run, to do what ifs, what if we do that, what if we do that, we will be using the old Hazer data set. So as we know, some of those roads aren't as bad, but also some of those roads are worse. And so from an overall network system perspective, I think we can get order of magnitude information to you based upon using the old Hazer.
So will it be about 90% of what PCI ratings will be? I mean, do you expect significant different road selections, or will they be like 90% the same?
No, I think what we're really gonna be doing is in that segment of failed roads, we will be now more able to say, within that segment of failed roads, this one is worse than that one.
Okay.
That's
But
really
not
what the
change
PCI
that
is gonna
segment
tell
of
us.
failed roads.
Right.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
It could potentially change the universe of failed roads. So just like was raised at the last TAC, and we're gonna have a conversation about that as part of the overview on thin lift overlays. Some of those roads that were identified using the degraded Pazer, that were identified as failed, are not as failed as thought to be. So we may have a set of roads that we currently believe to be failed based on the degraded Pazer that in fact are not failed, and they would come out of that group of failed roads that might be considered for repairs. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that the more scenarios we run prior to establishing a criteria, you potentially release lists of roads that might establish an unrealistic expectation by the community and the public that these roads will be fixed. So I wanna make sure that as staff, we're providing the subcommittee and the full committee as much information as you desire in order to make informed decisions. We're available if there are public forums held out in the districts to participate. If we can work up towards adopting a criteria with a complete set of current information, the PCI and otherwise, and then start running scenarios, I think that best serves everyone in terms of managing the expectations on what may or may not get fixed.
Yeah, that's a public relations nightmare, to go out and talk to the community and present a set of possible roads and then say, actually, no, I don't do
And
that.
that's-
So then when we have our community meetings, we need not focus on specific roads, we're focusing on the ideal criteria. What are the things that you folks would like to see included?
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes?
Just, the more we talk about this, the more it concerns me what kind of a list we're gonna generate for 2021. Because the last thing I think we want to do as a committee is say, we're not ready because the PCI is not done. And we won't, I guess my question is, we have a list for this current fiscal year. Do we also have at least a tentative list for next fiscal year?
We do not.
Because I think it would be a wise step to have something like that. You don't want to be scrambling at the end when we're not done with PCI stuff to say, I guess we better get a list for next year.
So we expect, right, given the window that Rich spoke to, we expect that on the way to generating a list of recommended roads for repair for 2021, that we will have updated PCI information. And we believe that many of the issues that Mr. Weaver brought out will be resolved as a result of having that PCI information updated. So our effort is geared towards getting that PCI information to be able to apply it in selecting or generating a list of selected roads for 2021.
So somehow, what we haven't been able to do for years to come up with an entire system outlook, we're gonna do now in 5 months?
That is our intent, yes.
Okay, well, more power to it.
It's absolutely critical to our ability to go forward in an open and transparent and systematic fashion to select roads and get them fixed. So there is no better time than the present to figure out how to do what we have been unable to do, or we've not adequately attempted to do yet to this point. So that's our
Well, you have all the tools are at the ready for this.
Well, that's what I'm curious about. What tool are we using to rate every mile of roadway we've got?
Well, the contractor will drive the roadway and then, based on instrumentation within the vehicle, assess the
Yeah.
PCI.
Right, and you couldn't do it accurately before because the van that was available didn't work accurately on local streets, as I understand it, because they couldn't go fast enough, and the segments were too short.
There's
So
two
other
aspects
issues.
to it. There's
Yeah.
the speed aspect, and then there's the fact that with that van, you can't utilize it on local roads. It's only
Right.
for the NHS
Right.
roads.
Right, and so this is a new tool.
But somebody does have
Yeah.
that
Oh,
technology
yes,
now, is what
yes.
we're saying.
Yeah.
And this PCI, another thing we need to consider is we're gonna have more data on which roads have really failed. One concern I've got, one of the subdivisions we're gonna do, Rob, in Green Valley, half the roads need mill and fill, the other half don't need that process. I think you guys take too much emphasis on mobilization. So I think we need to look, if we've got half the roads that need to be mill and fill, and the other half can be done with another treatment that's not as costly, we need to be looking at those options. So that's one thing I think.
And I think that's a great segue into the next topic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Talking about other treatments, and remember, right, many of you have been out to the San Joaquin test strip, and that whole project was done with the intent of identifying the treatment types that give us the greatest longevity at the best price. So we understand that going forward, we will have a larger range of options to utilize on repairing roads than what we've currently been discussing. So that is a point that's taken.
Yeah, before we get into the presentation, can we just talk a minute about the different types of failure that we're having? Obviously, some things can be failed worse than others. What generally are the different categories of failure? One would be the surface failure, then the base failure.
Curtis, we're gonna go through some
What's in here?
photos that we can talk about.
Okay,
Yeah, I
fine.
think it might be better
Okay.
that way.
Sounds good.
So, this presentation is for the purpose of evaluating viability of using a thin lift overlay on a street that might otherwise be treated with a melon fill. And I'll go ahead and read through the first page or so with more or less background stuff that we've already gone through. And then we'll get closer to the tables, that'll be the point where we can jump in with questions, stuff like that. But this might be a little boring for some of us, but we'll read through it. So the purpose of this paper is to compare the merits of thin lift overlays to the 2-inch melon fill for pavement management of local streets in Pima County. We know that pavements deteriorate at a rate that is typically represented by a performance curve. The exact shape of that curve depends on what the exact road is. Things like how thick the pavement is, climate, how much traffic's on the road, those sorts of things. Pavement treatments are also most cost effective when they're applied before the pavement condition falls to a point where that treatment type is no longer very effective. So that's another discussion we'll have. These treatment types can, typically fall into different levels of treatments. Like, we would start off with fog seals and crack seals, and we move into surface treatments like chip seals and micro surfacings, and then we start getting into what can be a thin overlay, or a thicker structural overlay, or a melon fill, and eventually you're down to, reconstruction of the whole section, which may be much more for a arterial than it would be for a local street. So we've looked at a study that was done, or a report that was written by the National Asphalt Pavement Association. It's called the Information Series 141. And included within that is a table on when to use thin lays, which we call thin overlays, or to shorten that up. And it provides an analysis in table format on, the types of conditions that might be appropriate for the use of those overlays. And some of the benefits of a thin overlay would be extending service life, protecting from water damage, improve structural strength in some instances where that's required, and improving the ride quality. What we find to be the sweet spot for a thin overlay would be, versus a chip seal or something like that, would be where we want to have a significant improvement in the ride quality, or where it may be a benefit to increase the structural strength of the pavement section. Napa's table also describes when those thin lays are not appropriate. Pima County has in the past rated roads based on a modified pavement surface evaluation and rating system, which we call a PASER, and that was originally sourced from the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and we've modified that a little bit, what we name the actual levels of failure and poor and good and things like that. But what the PASER table also gives you, in addition to a number rating, is specific information about what those conditions look like. How deep the rutting is, how extensive the cracking is, those sorts of things. And when you compare that to the Napa table, you can determine when it would not be appropriate to use different treatments, in particular the thin overlays. And based on that comparison, and with an adjustment to the PCI index, that level where the sweet spot for thin overlays might occur would be a PCI level of 50, where you still haven't fallen to the point that your road has failed, and there's a limited amount of distress in whether it's fatigue, thermal cracking, rutting, patches, other things that would make it where that thin overlay would have a less likelihood of success and So that's, the best level for that is around a 50. And another good use for an example of when you might use a thin overlay versus a chip seal or something like that would be where your surface is starting to strip out and you don't really have a structural rut, but you're just losing some of the aggregate. And if you went over that with a seal coat, you'd still have a rough spot there, it might be sealed, but you know, it may not stop the rattling completely. And a thin lay would provide you the benefit of smoothing that out. Those could also be filled with like thin linear patches before you chip seal or something. The thin lay may be another way to handle those sorts of things. But generally, the thin overlays are not recommended as a treatment once you've hit that PCI 30 level, which is our failed roads, and they're not of a lot of benefit once you have a really good road that doesn't need it. That would be a level of 60 or above. So in some cases, if we take a close look at some of these roads, for instance, this year that we've looked at, there could be a benefit of a thin overlay down at a PCI level of 40. We just want to make sure that there wasn't types of distress that would be problematic before you'd actually want to get some eyeballs on it and say, yeah, this makes sense for a thin lay or this doesn't. So for some more background, this year we decided to treat the failed roads, which means that thin lay is not appropriate for this cycle of work. And we're focused on trying to improve, we're getting a significant, for our investment, by doing the failed roads first, we're getting a significant increase in our PCI rating because when you fix a failed road that might have a PCI of 10 and take it to a 90, that's an 80-point bump for your investment. So when you fix a failed road, you get a pretty good bump out of that for your dollar, which raises our average index over the network considerably. If that's the way that you want to measure success, that's one way to do that. So that's what we focused on this year. And part of the problem that we're having now is that due to the fact that we didn't have PCI ratings on all of our roads, as we've discussed. We've used this algorithm and model to degrade our PASER ratings. And some of those I know are from like 2008. We talked about 2012. And some of them are pretty old, and we degraded those to a PCI. And there are some cases where we overestimated that degradation, where the roads lasted longer than we modeled. And what's happened is some of those roads aren't really failed. They're actually in poor condition or fair condition. So we've acknowledged that, and that's why we're looking to get really cracking on the procurement of the PCI ratings, and that's our goal for this year. Future years, we would have better information to actually select those worst roads. So one thing that came up at our last PC TAC meeting was that Tucson Asphalt took a look at our list of local roads and identified roads that they felt would meet their criteria for use of their thin overlay. And it turns out they were right. Some of those roads really aren't failed. We took a look at them, and many of them are in the 40 to 50 PCI range. So those are roads that we wouldn't necessarily, if we had looked for roads to mill and fill, those wouldn't have been ones we would have picked. We would have picked ones that were in the 10 to 30 range if given that choice. So now that we've looked at that, well, the industry also doesn't recommend thin overlays on the failed roads just because there's a structural problem there that's got to reflect through, and over time, you just don't get a good performance curve if you overlay something that's already done. That's the main thing. So the thin lays have this benefit. It's going to be in the PCI 40 to 50 range. I think the industry is pretty consistent on that. So now that we've determined that some of these streets are above 30, we've taken a look at many of them, and we've got a table here of some examples that we have some photos in, and John's gonna walk us through some of these the streets that we looked at, this Mountain Village Estates, number one is one that we wanted to look at because it's kind of a different type of pavement than the others. It was a road that was accepted into our network as a dirt road in 1974. Subdivision says that it will maintain it as a dirt road. And about 1998, we had a program to abate dust in the county, and it got chip sealed. So this road is a failed road, but it's not built like a modern designed
It'd be
engineered pavement
more of a
section.
surface treatment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is an example of the photos of that road, so, you can look at that with your own eyes, and these are 1 acre lots. They're pretty spread out, there's no curbs or sidewalks or anything like that. You can treat this in a number of different ways.
But not with a thin overlay.
Well, no, you can treat it with, I mean,
If it has a good native base, it should be able to.
Yes.
Just a chip seal.
so it's just a judgment call, how much do you wanna invest in the road of that class? Which, you could argue is different than one that has been engineered and has, structural pavement section, right?
So to that point, I think it warrants a little discussion. So on the table, it shows as a PCI rated 20. And what Jim had said previously is below 30, right, that the industry standard would not recommend thin overlay. So we're talking about, when Jim says you can put a thin overlay on it, that is not the recommended treatment for that roadway. So we need to be mindful of that. We can do anything, right? Is it the recommended or the best practice? And I think that that's something important to keep in mind. So what Jim had said is in that range from 40 to 50, right, are roadways that would be better candidates for thin overlays than those ones that are down.
Well, I think something important, point that I was trying to make also is that these aren't industry standard roads. So when you apply an industry standard, it would be normally applied to a road that was built under what that industry standard is there to maintain, which was an engineered road. It's at least a typical section of 2 inches of asphalt over 4 inches of pavement. And the hard facts are in Pima County, we got a whole bunch of local streets that weren't built to that kind of engineering standard, so.
Are we talking about on the thin overlay, that is the green asphalt, or is it just the any asphalt?
So we're not singling out a product. So there's a variety of thin overlays, and we would, want to develop a specification that allowed any, right, thin overlay vendor to go ahead and compete, to, apply that treatment on the selected roadways. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we go through the discussion. And, we're talking thin overlays in general, not a specific product of thin overlay. The one you've heard mostly of and from is the Tucson asphalt product.
So these streets, correct me if I'm wrong, the other Mountain Village estates,
Right
which are
next door, right.
across the street.
The ones that were built to
There was
standard.
a newer subdivision right next to the one we just looked at. It was built around, this one was 2006, somewhere around 2000, I should say, 2002. So, and these streets were 2 inches over 4 inches, they've got wedge curbs, it's higher density, what you would typically think of as a subdivision in Pima County. And these streets, our PASA rating is a 50, or a PCI rating is what we would consider a 50. They look pretty good. So these are ones that I think we could probably all agree aren't failed. So,
Could you do chip and seal on one like this?
good.
So again, if I can speak to that. So Jim is gonna give you the maximum flexibility, right, to decide what approach to take. I think there are a number of considerations. So being mindful that we selected a group of roads based on criteria and using degraded Pazer that were believed to be failed. And we're coming back now upon further investigation and validation, and we're saying some of those roads are not failed, or not as failed as believed to be. So part of the discussion will be, what do we want to do going forward with that? So, right, obviously we published a list of road repairs, and do we want to, and we've stated in repairing those roads that the treatment will be 2-inch mill and fill. So we have somewhat communicated an approach and established an expectation. And input from this committee in terms of what approach you'd like to see us take is desired, and that's why we're presenting this information and showing you the treatments. I think in this instance, going back to Jim's introductory comments, given the actual condition of the road and where we would put the Pazer versus what the degraded Pazer was, this subdivision would be a candidate for a thin overlay. So that to me is the discussion that we should be having with the subcommittee. Do we stick with what we already communicated, all selected roads get the stated treatment, or in instances like this, do we go with a thin overlay? And I would say from staff's perspective, again, looking at the transparency and fulfilling commitments that were made, to come back and on a road such as this apply a chip seal treatment, we may be subject to folks saying, you indicated you were gonna do this and you did that and you don't do what you say you're gonna do. And I think that's an important consideration. All of us have been out in the community, we've interfaced with residents, we've heard the claims or the concerns that things are not being followed through on or done that was said was going to be done, and we need to be mindful of that. So, you know, from a staff perspective, we believe that within the realm of acceptable options would be to continue with the 2-inch mill and fill, although the road itself may be in better condition than necessitating that, or to look at a thin overlaying here, but not to go with a chip seal treatment on this road, regardless of whether, if we were evaluating this from scratch, that might be an acceptable option that we would consider.
Well, can you tell us what's the most cost effective from our life cycle?
So we're gonna show you that,
Okay.
absolutely. So we don't want you to,
Okay.
don't act yet.
Okay.
Just hold on, we're gonna get
Mr.
there.
Chair, let me ask Carmine a question, because you mentioned it about, you know, public confidence in what's being said. I keep hearing reference to Chuck's memo of February 2018, where he identified 2 subdivisions that could be candidates for green asphalt.
Yes.
And we keep hearing from the public members, what happened to Huckleberry's direction? Well, it wasn't direction, but this says if the board is so inclined.
Right.
Did we get any reaction one way or another? Can we put that to rest somehow?
So I believe that we followed through on the county administrator's direction. So we obtained quotes, we provided that information on Moondance and Sabino Town and Country. We had on the tax agenda this topic for discussion, and there was not an action taken by the committee to move forward with applying the green asphalt treatment. The other thing that the county administrator had suggested is if these 2 subdivisions were successful, then we would look to identify 8 additional subdivisions and apply the same treatment. And I wrote a memorandum to him that said, prior to going forward with expanded utilization, that we should develop a methodology to evaluate different pavement types. And the outcome of that was the San Joaquin test strip. So we did follow the county administrator's direction. We obtained the quotations. We discussed it with TAC. The board did not discuss it as a body or at least individually with staff to my knowledge. And then we established the San Joaquin test project, and that is going to inform us as we go forward. And I think everybody is anxious to see how those pavements perform. Time is an element of getting the information that's going to be useful to incorporate. So for 2021, as part of the schedule that we showed you and the information that we bring to you, we'll bring some preliminary observation information for you on the test strip project and the different treatment types that are out there. It may not be enough to definitively say, use this method over that method, but as we move forward in time, we expect to be able to bring you better data that then will inform the discussion. And again, we're all interested in the same outcome, and that is building roads or repairing roads for the longest amount of time, right, life of the roadway at the least amount of cost. So that is part and parcel of that, and I believe that we did adhere to the direction of the county administrator.
And you think that's been made clear to these two developments?
So I had a conversation with Ms. Tittle following the last TAC committee meeting. I did provide a similar synopsis of my view of that. I understand that there is a renewed interest in visiting that. I think that there's there are opportunities as we go forward to consider the full range of different treatment types. The question is, in this cycle for fiscal year 20, where we selected roads and we have dollars allocated to those roads, we are probably best served by bidding those projects, seeing where we land, and similar to the local road program, if there are savings that accrue, we would come back to the TAC and say, we have savings from the bid pricing, and there was a portion of unallocated, right? The total amount of money available for 20 is 26 million. We allocated 25 million in change. So there's some unallocated dollars, there may be bid savings, and we can come back to the committee and say, with this money for fiscal year 20, how would you like to proceed? Would you like us to use the same criteria adopted? Would you like to establish new criteria for this? And we can have that conversation. So I think that slow and steady here is prudent on the part of the committee, and certainly it's staff's preference to be very thorough in terms of how we approach this, as opposed to being reactionary in any one direction. So, we can, continue to inform the committee on these things. We can, there's an agenda item that was requested by committee member Letskis to talk about the particular petition for Moondance. So we would expect that discussion to take place at the full TAC meeting, and staff again would be inclined to recommend, let's proceed with the roads that have been selected. Let's identify what dollars are available after that work has been bid, and we know that there aren't going to be changes to it, and then talk about what to do with that, or discuss what to do in fiscal year 20.
Carmen, I'd also encourage, I commend you for doing the test strip, but there are several cities like Sarita that has experimented with the overlay, so I think we need to stay in touch with them to see how it's performed in addition to our test strip.
Understood, and we interact with Sarita. We've talked to the city of Tucson. I think, well, from our perspective, it's the same challenge we face with the San Joaquin test strip, and that's the test of time. And that, I think, will continue to be a present item until enough time passes that we feel that we have enough information to arrive at a level of comfort. What you're hearing today is that based on our recent research, that we believe that there is a place in the overall repair program for thin overlay treatment. So I think it's not to say that we don't believe that that is an approach that should be used. It is, and we expect to have further conversation with the subcommittee, with the full committee, on the way to selection of the next round of roads for repair.
Who are the other companies, have we had any other companies who have approached us that do the thin lift overlay?
So it's not so much company-based, I think it's a.
Oh, so it's a treatment, so
it's a
anyone
treatment
that
type.
does, anyone that does road repair, any company that does road repair may also have a thin overlay treatment that they do. Is that what
That's
you're saying?
correct.
Well, speaking of time, let's get back with Jim's presentation. We've got 6 minutes and 5 seconds.
Oh, it's
Time flies.
We've got a few more pictures, why don't we just
Maybe
go
we
ahead
can
and
go to the curve, that was what.
Yeah, we can do that.
So we've got pictures, we can make those available, we can come back, and if the subcommittee decides to
So
like to meet.
Those first photos you showed us are right over here someplace, right? In the southwest side?
Yeah, they're off of, Ajo and Camino Verde
Yeah,
area.
okay.
So, and if I may, so staff is in the process, the entire list of roads that were selected for fiscal year '20, staff is going through this review, and we'll be updating that table so that we have a complete set of data, including photos and an assessment of what the actual PCI is, available for future discussion with this subcommittee or with the full committee. So we're not just focused on those ones that Tucson Asphalt said they felt were candidates for a thin overlay. We've gone out and are in the process of providing updated information for the entire list of those selected roadways. And going forward, if I may, not to belabor it, but going forward, what we understand is that it's critically important that we field verify any selection or recommended selection of roadways. So that will be part of the process as we go forward.
So what we did here was we simplified the curves for pavement deterioration in a street saver, and they've got a lot of data in their system on how long pavements last, and of course, how long that lasts depends on the road and the factors we talked about before. But generally, what they're saying is that for a street to degrade from a PCI 100, which is a new condition, to a level 40, which is the level that we're talking about potentially applying thin overlays to, it would take a 2-inch milling replacement for a new road 29 years to get to that level. They also say that if you did a thin structural, well, not a thin structural overlay, a thick structural overlay on that same road, it would take about 21 years. So it starts out smooth, but it degrades a little faster than if you took out the bad stuff. So, and then a double chip seal would bump you from the 40 up to a beginning point of about 67. It gives you a 67-point increase in your PCI, and that double chip would last about 17 years. Street Saver doesn't have anything in for thin overlays, but based on the fact that the thin overlay is intermediate between a surface treatment and a structural overlay, we can assume that it's going to perform midway between those in terms of the PCI bump and the duration of the life to deteriorate. So that it's going to land you somewhere between 17 and 21 years. We just said 19, which means that that thin overlay is going to last about 2/3 of the length that the structural replacement would. So 19 years versus 29 years. So then, because those time frames aren't the same, we've got another slide where we've applied a Cape seal at year 19 to the thin lift overlay, and that extends that life out for another 17 years to year 36. So then we can begin to compare the life cycle costs of the two. So, and that'll be in our next slide. We've got a table. Go ahead and go to that. So if we look at the mill and fill, beginning at a level PCI of 40, our cost to do that, based on recent bidding and our estimating for local streets, would be on the order of $15 a square yard, gives you a 29-year life, and that's 52 cents a year. If you did the 1-inch overlay, initial cost would be about $10, and the longevity is 19 years. It's got a similar cost per year, but it doesn't take you to year 29, it only takes you to 19. So then if you take that same thin overlay and apply a Cape Seal, there's an additional cost of $6, which would occur at year 19, which adjusted for inflation would be $11. So I've got two lines there. So if you want to use inflation or you don't, it lands on both sides of the other cost per year. So what we're saying is that over the life cycle, they're fairly competitive. You can play with the estimating, you can play with the years, and the truth of the matter is that thin lift overlays, if you assess the road correctly and you don't pick a road that might have, failure potentials, then it's a viable alternative to replacing it at a 40 PCI level.
And all the similar ride qualities.
And it would have similar ride qualities. Now, once you drop down to that 30 or below, that's when, then that, you can't assume the same curve for that thin overlay. It's not gonna hold up that way. So that's basically the analysis.
So Jim, is the mill and fill a 2-inch overlay or 1-inch overlay?
Mill and fills we always do too. If we've got a thick pavement section, sometimes we'll only mill out 1 inch just to get rid of junk on top, but on local roads, you almost always take the whole thing out.
Yeah.
And then you have to deal with sometimes preparing the surface again.
So this chart pretty much shows to get the biggest bang for our buck and spread it in lumber, the overlay with the chip seal eventually would be a better deal.
The thin overlay?
Well, no.
Not if you factor in the inflation, so you're not doing the Cape Seal until you're 19, so we can't assume that the cost,
Well, I know, but
That's-
still, unfortunately, we're in a situation now we shouldn't be, and I'm not blaming staff as far as all these road conditions. So we gotta get as much bang for our buck as we can to spread it.
So within that narrow window of 40 to 50 range, that it becomes competitive. If we want to go for the benefit of fixing the failed roads first, the 30s and down, that's a different model that we would look at.
What inflation rate did you use in this, like 5%?
2.7.
2.7.
That's what I use. Someone gave me a number.
That's probably a federal number.
Popped it in.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that the Cape Seal is similar to our test section 6, which is a chip seal and then a micro
And we
surface.
use a Cape Seal on this, the curve we have, whether it's a Cape Seal or a double chip seal is similar. The idea with the Cape Seal is that, it looks a little bit more like new pavement than a chip seal does. So if that was our desire, then we could use the Cape Seal. Double chip seal would have a similar cost, and if you were doing it over a previously chip sealed road, then that was the level of the expectation.
Right.
You might use a double chip seal.
This is gonna maintain the right quality, right?
Well, the surface smoothness for pushing walkers and stuff like
Yeah.
that would be a little better.
Yeah, okay. Good, yeah, it's interesting, good stuff. Good work. Okay. Very good. Anybody have any questions or comments? Did you write this, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay, nice job. Very good. Okay, so you,
Mr.
any
Chairman,
questions or comments?
is there any need to schedule an additional subcommittee meeting? Do you wanna go into the TAC committee meeting and have a discussion and then decide?
What was, I was just distracted, say that.
Is there any need to schedule an additional subcommittee meeting prior to the next TAC, full TAC
Oh,
committee meeting? Or do you
Well,
think-
our next full TAC is 2 weeks away,
Mhm.
so I don't think we need to, do you, Lucretia? Yeah,
Um,
between now and then, I mean, what new information are we gonna have? None.
I know we ran out of time to have maybe follow-up discussion to this, so I just raised that. It's up to
Yeah.
the subcommittee. We can come back after the full TAC committee meeting, maybe new questions surface there that warrant
What's-
further discussion.
Yeah, what's the committee think
One of
maybe
the things
after?
you remember, I think one of the things that this committee was charged with, right, was looking at establishing a criteria for moving forward. So are we gonna be able to report that back to the
Well, one thing we discussed at the last meeting was the
Yeah.
PCI method over the other. And you're coming back with that, I
Yeah.
think that's good.
Yeah.
So we do have the list of roadways, and by the full TAC committee meeting, we'll be able to show you the full list of selected roads, tell you which of those are candidates for thin overlay versus the mill and fill that was selected. That is still a remaining question. We can move forward and we can mill and fill those roads, or is there an interest by the committee in using a thin overlay? We will have a set of roads that we believe are candidates for thin overlays, and the question then is, do we take those out of the mill and fill package, put together a thin overlay package and go ahead and bid that, or do we move forward with the mill and fill as originally identified?
I think it's an important question for us to ask and be able to report back to the committee, so I don't know what is the protocol for going forward with that? Okay, okay.
Take the battery.
I mean, we could schedule, and then back to my original point, is the subcommittee interested in meeting again before the full committee meeting? We can schedule something for a week from today, and we can have some further discussion after you've had an opportunity to consider this.
Yeah, I think it's probably at a point where the full committee should probably be the one to pose the question to, on it.
Well-
On
Yeah, but I'd like this committee to have a position. So when there's a report, we can say the subcommittee is recommending X. So do we need to meet again, or do we have the time to hang out for a second? Is everybody
Well,
on time?
yeah. I don't, anybody have to run away to a doctor's appointment or anything?
We're
I think
here all
10 or
day.
15 minutes, yeah. All right.
We got Tom.
I'm gonna leave, but I can't vote in.
We'll call your wife. So basically, I guess the question is whether basically, essentially to do a demonstration project, kind of out of sequence, using the thin overlay, or using the thin pavement technique, or to stay the course, which is what Carmine was talking about previously. So that's the question before the subcommittee right now, for those two particular locations, I guess. And so what's the thought of the subcommittee?
And we've seen how recently these payments look, at least in the near term on San Joaquin. Similar, it was a similar road condition.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
this
50.
level that we're considering, that's probably 40, 50 range.
Right.
And we know what they look like.
Sure.
I'm so double-minded on the issue because I'm concerned about the ongoing impression of county staff and transportation department not doing what they say they're gonna do. And I'm concerned about that. However, I also understand, very much respect the fact that, you know, the situation has changed and a more efficient, less costly method is called for.
And this committee has the benefit of this discussion to understand how we arrived here.
Right.
And that, unfortunately, is not a discussion that can be had with each member of the community who may formulate a perception of what has taken place. I think, again, right, staff would share your double-mindedness in this instance, that, you know, we've identified roads and a treatment type, and moving forward with that demonstrates that we've fulfilled our commitment. There is a set of those roads that could accept a lesser treatment, which is still pavement, it's still new pavement, it's just not the mill and fill treatment. And, you know, we can go either way with it. I think when you look at the performance expectation, you can get to 29 years with the mill and fill without applying the Cape Seal. So given what we have in front of us as far as a need for fixing roads, can we assure that we would be back in 19 years to lay a Cape Seal on top of a thin overlay on these roadways?
Well, you know, at this point, I would suggest that we follow staff's recommendation on this and stay the course.
I agree with
Throwing
that.
out there, yeah,
I
Yeah.
agree with that.
okay. All right.
And I think the only downside to that is, right, we've applied a treatment ahead of when it's necessary, but at the same time, we can indicate that there's a greater longevity received with the performance of that road over time.
Right.
And we have benefited from the discussion in terms of at least now identifying the range of roadway condition which could accept something other. And we are gonna have potentially some savings from this program to come back to you and say, okay, what do you wanna do with it? And if you wanna say, let's go ahead and use that to pilot thin overlays, we can do that. Or if you decide you wanna fix more failed roads, because that's what we started with, you can do that as well.
And it's not like we're wasting money. I mean,
Right,
if you look at
exactly.
this, the mill and fill is a good use of our
Yeah.
funds.
Right, and we do have Saurita as an example as well. So it's not like we need to rush into it as another jurisdiction when somebody is out there ahead of us.
I think we're so far along getting your bid packages together this year. I agree with you. I think we need to do this in 21.
Okay.
Look at this, but not screw up the process right now.
It's clear direction,
Just
appreciate that.
I agree.
Yes.
Makes
You wanna
sense to
take a vote
everybody?
on that? I mean,
John, are you okay with presenting this?
I'm fine, yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay,
Need to vote?
any?
I think
so.
I think we've got some direction. Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Oh,
Okay.
it's perfect.
Okay,
We'll
very good.
continue forward as originally intended, and we'll have other opportunities to discuss using different treatments.
Yes, right, okay, very good. So